Did you know that bicycles helped women become more independent? Let me explain. Apparently, many claims have been made about the invention of the bicycle, but unfortunately, most of them lack any evidence. The first verifiable claim for its invention comes from a German baron. He invented his Lauf machine, which is translated from German into running machine, in 1817. And patented his design in 1818, which was the first successful two-wheeled steerable human-propelled machine commercialized. So we can say that since the early 19th century, people have been riding bikes. But when did they start racing and why? Cycling as an official sport actually began on May 31st, 1868, with a 1,200-meter race between the fountains and the entrance of Saint-Cloud Park, located in Les Hauts-de-Seine department, southwest of Paris in France. And on November 7, 1869, so a year later, the first city-to-city race was held between Paris and Rouen. But the development of racing as a popular sport in Europe really began in the 1890s with the improvements in road condition and also the introduction of some of the one-day classics that continue to this day, for example, the Paris-Roubaix race. In 1903, the 21-day-long Tour de France was inaugurated and has continued every year since, except during the First World War and the Second World War. There are also the grand 3-week tours of Italy, Giro d'Italia, and Spain, Vuelta a España. The professional road racing season for men usually begins in January with races in Australia and Malaysia, continues from February through October in Europe and the United States, and closes again in Asia in November and December. Overall, for most riders, the season includes about 120 days of competition spread over 8 months. The sport is governed by l'Union Cycliste Internationale, which is based in Switzerland, and by each country's cycling federation. Road and track races for men were held at the Olympics in 1896, but women only entered the Olympic competitions in road races in 1984 and track races in 1988, so more than 80 years later. Mountain biking, which is a form of cross-country race over rough terrain, became an Olympic event for men and women at the 1996 Games in Atlanta. Now, all of that is for professional racing. But what about amateur? Bicycle racing began interesting amateurs around the 1880s. Because in the late 1870s, bicycle designers were exploring new designs that would allow the riders to be close to the ground, and that would therefore be safer. The British inventor John Kemp Starley designed the first successful quote-unquote safety bicycle in 1885. And so with the introduction of the safety bicycle, cycling became enormously popular among both men and women because they could get together in an unchaperoned way. And as with tennis, it actually became a way for people to flirt. And as you can imagine, public cries of alarm at the prospect of moral chaos arose from this, and also from the evolution of women's cycling attire. And speaking of women, during this time when bicycle became very popular in Europe, The primary achievement the bicycle gained for the women's movement was that it gave women a greater amount of social mobility. You have to understand that at that time, for women, riding a bike was seen as an unsafe activity and not very feminine. But despite these social norms, some women kept cycling. This is, for example, the story of Annie Londonderry, whose real name was actually Annie Cowan Kopchowski, because she became the first woman to accomplish an around-the-globe bicycle trip in 1894. You also have to keep in mind that the bicycle impacted upper and middle-class white women the most. This transformed these women's role in society from remaining in the private or domestic spheres as caregivers, wives, and mothers to having a greater public appearance and involvement in the community because they could just go further. Going back to the clothes, most women in the 1890s rode their bike with the traditional socially acceptable silhouette of an ankle-length skirt for cycling. But this could be dangerous, as the skirt could become entangled in the spokes and chain while riding. So solutions to this problem included adaptations to the bicycle, such as a skirt guard that sat over the rear wheel and kept the skirt from entangling itself, basically. And there was also adaptations done to the clothing themselves, such as skirts with cords that could allow them to be raised while riding. And there was also skirts that were one piece in front but split into legs like pants in the back. Of all the bicycle costumes, the bloomer costume is the most widely known from this period, and it consisted of full trousers gathered at the ankle, worn with a calf-length skirt with a jacket on top. You see, at the time, the decision to wear these athletic costumes was a personal choice for women, and by making this choice, women to a small degree were able to take control of their lives. But as you can imagine, these clothes were met with mixed approval, and it was mostly men who were against them because they thought that these clothes could potentially disturb men. They also saw these bicycle costumes as physical representations of a woman stealing men's characteristics and thereby blurring the lines between femininity and masculinity and what is socially acceptable for each group. And as I've been talking about it, I think since the beginning of this podcast, I think it's the case for any sport. Doctors at the time were worried about the effects of cycling for women's reproductive health. Namely, they believed if a woman was able to ride a bike, she would become infertile or her uterus would fall out. And at the time, there was, of course, no evidence of this ever happening, but doctors used these theories to discourage women from getting onto a bike. The first Tour de France Féminin was held in the summer of 1955. After having on and off races throughout the years, it actually stopped entirely in 2009. In 2022, the competition made a comeback with Le Tour de France Femmes. And while this is progress, the men's race is 23 days with like 2 rest days, which is because like the race is actually 21 days, while the woman is only 8. That being said, for the 2025 edition, the tour will be extended to 9 days. In 1998, the UCI Women's Road Cycling World Cup was created. It was a season-long road bicycle competition for women organized by the UCI between 1998 and 2015. And this competition consisted of a series of races linked together, which varied from 6 to 12 events depending on the years. But in 2016, the competition was replaced by the UCI Women's World Tour, which is the female elite road cycling tour. As of 2025, the tour includes 27 events in Europe, China, and Australia. And just as for men, La Vuelta Feminina, Giro d'Italia Women, and Le Tour de France Femmes are the longest and biggest stage races in the calendar. In terms of athletes, I could mention a lot of women because although women have been excluded from the sport for a long time, many have great stories and incredible achievements under the belt. But to keep the episode short, I decided to talk about 4 of them. Of course, if you are on YouTube, feel free to share in the comment section any other athlete who inspires you. So the first one I would like to talk about is Tilly Anderson. She was a road and track cyclist who was considered by the League of American Women as the best woman cyclist in the world when she was only 20 years old. She was a Swedish immigrant who arrived in the US when she was 16 years old, and she bought her first bicycle at the age of 18. She outpaced the best of the best on the wheel with times that are still actually impressive today. During the summer of 1894, she took part in the race over Elgin Aurora Century Course in Chicago and broke the century record. She later traveled around the country, taking part in 6-day bicycle races for women. In June 2000, Tilly was posthumously inducted into the United States Cycling Hall of Fame, an undisputed champion and a true pioneer in women's athletics. Alfonsina Strada was an Italian cyclist and the only woman in the world to have ridden one of cycling's 3 major stages race when only men were allowed to enter. She actually started in the Giro d'Italia in 1924 when the organizers mistook her for a man. Later, the newspaper called her the devil in a dress. She started cycling early, since she participated in her first race at about 13 years old and won nearly all the girls' races she entered and many of the boys' events. Her reputation actually brought her an invitation to ride to the Grand Prix of St. Petersburg in Russia in 1909. In total, she won 36 races against men and rode exhibition races through Italy, Spain, France, and Luxembourg. In 1938, she set the female world record for the hour, covering 32.58 kilometers at Longchamp in Paris, a record beaten 17 years later by Tamara Novikova of the Soviet Union. Beryl Burton was an English racing cyclist who dominated the women's sport, winning more than 90 domestic championships and 7 world titles, and also setting numerous national records. Among many titles, she won the Women's World Road Race Championship in 1960 and 1967. On the track, she specialized in individual pursuit, winning world championship medals almost every year across 3 decades. She was world champion 5 times, silver medalist 3 times, and winner of bronze 3 times too. In domestic time trial, or TT, competitions, Burton was almost unbeatable. She won the Road Time Trials Council British All-Rounder competition for 25 consecutive years, from 1959 to 1983. And in 1967, she set a world record for the 12-hour time trial, which exceeded the men's record for 2 years. Marianne Vos is a Dutch multidiscipline cyclist who currently rides for the UCI Women's World Team Visma Lease a bike. After winning a junior European and World Championship in road racing, she continued her success in senior cycling by becoming world champion in cyclocross and road racing at the age of 19. She also added track racing world championships when she won the points race in 2008 and the scratch race in 2011. At the 2008 Summer Olympics, she won the gold medal in the points race, and at the 2012 Summer Olympics, gold in women's road race. She's a 3 times world road race champion and 8 times world cyclocross champion. She ranked first in points in the UCI Women's Road World Cup 5 times, and in 2019 UCI Women's World Tour. She has 24 races at the UCI Cyclocross World Cup and claimed the first place overall in 2018-2019 season. Vos was a founding member of Le Tour Entier, which campaigned for Women's Tour de France and improvements in women's cycling in general. Throughout this episode, I mentioned many types of race and I would like to explain them to you. So there's road racing, and it can involve both team and individual competitions, and they are contested in various ways. You have one-day road races with criterium, which consists of several laps around closed circuit, and also time trial or against the clock races. There are also multi-stage events like Tour de France, which often combine all the elements I just mentioned in one-day races. Track racing events can be done also individually or in teams and happen in a velodrome. Track racing includes events like the sprint, the pursuit, the 1 kilometer time trial, the points race, and the keirin, or motor-paced race. The keirin is actually very popular in Japan because betting on the outcome is legal there. Cyclocross, or cross-country racing, established in the mid-1920s, covers rough terrain that may require racers to actually dismount their bike and walk or run with their bicycles. Mountain biking is also over rough terrain, but usually it's downhill rather than on flat and is actually becoming increasingly popular. One difference though between cyclocross and mountain bike racing is that usually cyclocross riders are allowed to ride up to 3 bikes during a race, whereas in mountain bike competitions, the cyclist must carry all the tools necessary to fix the bicycle, as only one bicycle may be used during a race. One other recent form of racing is bicycle motocross racing, or BMX, which can be traced to motocross racing. So racers ride on dirt tracks, which usually feature a large number of jumps and turns. In 2008, BMX racing made its Olympic debut at the Beijing Games in the form of men's and women's individual races. Now, before ending this episode, I would like to quickly address the use of performance-enhancing drugs. It is considered to be widespread in cycling, although honestly every sport has its own issues with it. So, although stimulants and anti-fatigue drugs, such as amphetamines, were common in the past, now they are detectable by tests, and so they are not used anymore. And usually to circumvent the medications prohibited by the UCI, many professional teams and individual riders employ doctors to administer drugs that are difficult to detect, such as erythropoietin or EPO, a hormone that acts to increase the level of red blood cells and thus the flow of oxygen to the muscles. The UCI often checks riders for the level of red cells in their blood with a limit of 50%. And 55% for riders from high altitude regions, I believe. Anything above that is regarded as an indication of the use of EPO and carries a 2-year suspension. And that's more or less all for today. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and as always, share this episode around. If you are on Spotify, actually, it would be super helpful if you can rate this episode to give it more visibility on Spotify. And if you are on YouTube, like, comment, share, subscribe. And now that you know more about cycling, let's keep learning with the Athlete's Voices.